Pipe Attack. From revolting robots to pathetic attempts at innovation, we count 15 of the worst video games of all time. Number 15. Steel Battalion. Heavy armor. Mechs are cool. Everyone knows that. And the original Steel Battalion was especially cool with the gigantic controller that gave you the extra level of immersion that simply couldn't be beat at the time. However, for some reason the developers thought that using the Kinect would get you close enough to the level of immersion of the original title. Not only was the Kinect integration horrible, the gameplay and story was also a pile of absolute shit. Number 14. Sonic the Hedgehog Sonic 06. Now, this isn't the absolute worst game in the world, but it comes damn close, especially when you take into account the game was made by Sega and not some random doofus in his basement somewhere. Loads of glitches are included in this game. There's also bad gameplay, and the plot makes 50 Shades of Grey look like a literary masterpiece. This was also the beginning of the end for Sonic, as the majority of the games released after this were poorly thought out blue spiky turds. Number 13. Bomberman Act Zero. Everyone loves a quirky looking, almost cute pyromaniac that just loves blowing blocks up in seemingly endless series of mazes designed to force Bomberman to blow himself up. However, Bomberman was rebooted into the dark and gritty, that is the 7th gen gaming Bomberman Act Zero, in hopes of capturing the Call of Duty 420 quickscope smoke babies audience. And of course this didn't work at all, and on top of this it had some really awful gameplay thanks to horrifically bad collision detection and intensely monotonous gameplay that gets old quicker than it takes to place the disc into the disk drive. Number 12. Aquaman Battle for Atlantis. Everyone's favorite superhero, right? No, not Batman. No, not Iron Man. Come on now. Everyone loves Aquaman the most, right? The problem with making an Aquaman game is that you almost have to have it underwater. And really, who actually enjoys underwater levels? But that's not all. Everything about the game's combat is superfluous except for mashing the A button. That's right, you literally don't have to worry about learning any combat skills except for mindlessly pressing A while moving awkwardly towards your enemies. Fun. Number 11. Bubsy 3D. Everyone's favorite platforming... What animal is Bubsy again? It looks kind of like a fox got real close with a tiger while taking copious amounts of crack. Character design aside, this game attempted to ride the success of Super Mario 64 and failed in a rather spectacular fashion. The controls are deplorable, and the graphics are bad even for the time, and the entire game just feels like a Chinese ripoff of the game that nobody knew existed in the first place. Number 10. Zelda, the Wand of Gamelon. Both of these CDI titles are well known for being laughably bad, with graphics that somehow managed to look worse than Pong on an aesthetic level despite being released decades later. Not only that, but the gameplay is so simple and poorly executed that you're more likely to have fun by yourself in a library full of books in a language that you can't read. At the very least, these games have produced comically bad images for the internet to exploit. My boy. Number 9. Doctor Who, Return to Earth. Now, I like Doctor Who as much as the next guy, but that doesn't mean I'll slurp up any old shovelware product related to a title that I like. The Wii has some seriously bad games on it, thanks to it being so massively popular, and the Return of Earth is easily the worst of the bunch. The gameplay for this game is somehow worse than the 5th gen graphics it shows off, with terrible camera controls and being unable to see the enemies when you really need to be plaguing the experience. That is even bad on a conceptual level. Number 8. Limbo of the Lost. This game has so many things wrong with it, I don't even know where to start. The trippy and uncanny looking sculptures would be too weird even for Salvador Dali, the creator of LSD Dream Simulator. Not only are the graphics bizarre and unlikable, a vast majority of the assets and story have been directly ripped off a wide variety of sources, including World of Warcraft and Pirates of the Caribbean. All of this might have been ignorable if the puzzles were any good, but of course they're everything you hate about point and click and more. Number 7. Pac-Man 2600. Everyone and their mother quite literally knows about Pac-Man, but when people think of the cheese wheel, they tend to think of the arcade version. However, Pac-Man for the 2600 exists and it was appalling. Pac-Man is all about the maze, everyone knows that, but somehow Atari managed to screw up one of the most iconic mazes known to humans, even back then. Get this, Atari was so convinced that this knockoff version of Pac-Man would be a massive success that they produced 12 million units of this aberration, which is actually more than the amount of Atari 2600 units sold at the time. I'm no business consultant, but I'm pretty sure anyone can recognize just how stupid of a decision this is. Number 6. M&M's Kart Racing. Kart racers that aren't related to Nintendo have been a dying breed for a long time, so some poor starved individual might have been excited for this release. However, unless this is the first video game ever released, it would have been almost possible to like this game, and even then it's still not an easy game to enjoy. The racing feels like driving through molasses and Vaseline, with no real tight controls or skill involved unless one considers luck to be a skill. Number 5. Ride to Hell: Retribution. This game doesn't seem to have the characteristics of a horrible game. The graphics are acceptable, the gameplay doesn't really appear to be ripped off of anything, and it was released on major consoles. However, this quickly falls apart once a person attempts to actually play the game, as glitches are more frequent than not and the story reads like a 13-year-old boy's half-assed fantasy. The gameplay is like throwing macaroni at a blue whale's corpse. Unsatisfying, slightly offensive, and only valuable for its comedic absurdity. Number 4. Superman 64. What do you think of when you think of Superman? If your answer was flying at subsonic speeds through a maze of floating rings, then you are the target audience of Superman 64. Because apart from the occasional brief section where you save a person by flying into them, that's all that there is in Superman 64. Well, actually, I lied. There's other stuff like controls that give you extremely accurate feeling of what it would be like to try to move without a brain. Number 3. Ash's Cricket 2013. This game was delayed multiple times because of quality concerns. It was eventually released 6 months after the initial release date. Of course, this would be fine if they fixed the problems. After all, waiting for a game to be released is better than playing an unfinished turd, but they didn't. Ash Cricket's 2013 is absolutely riddled with bugs and shoddy animation. I wonder if they even had a QA department in the first place, or maybe they just gave it to the 3-year-old children to test it. Number 2. E.T. the Extraterrestrial. It's no secret that a vast majority of Atari 2600 games simply don't hold up by today's standards, but E.T. is an extra special level of bad. Every time you do anything of consequence, including moving, you consume energy. How do you replenish the energy? With a not-so-generic brand of peanut butter and chocolate snacks. Of course, being the 2600, what you really collect is an amorphous series of pixels. This game is so terrible it's considered a massive contribution to the 1984 video game crash. Not only that, but there's literally hundreds of thousands of these cartridges buried in a landfill somewhere in New Mexico. Number 1. Big Rigs Off the Road Racing. In this game, you race a semi on and off road, whilst hauling illegal cargo and dodging the police, or at least that's what it says on the packaging. In actuality, there are no police, and the opponent stops just before the race line, allowing you to win as long as you make it to the finish line, which in fairness is no small task, as the game is so infested with horrible coding that it's entirely possible for the game to crash at any moment. But when you do reach the finish line, you're welcome to a massive "You're winner" to make you feel special. And that's it for this countdown. Okay, bye.